Okay, I wanted to talk about the reasons why things might be more or less elastic. We might call them determinants of demand elasticity or determinants of elasticity of demand. So, what makes something more or less elastic? And there's lots of reasons, but three biggest reasons we're going to talk about. That is to say, the things that tends to drive why um, curves tend to be more or less elastic are right up here. And let's review real quickly. I've drawn two demand curves here. You can see demand curve D. I put a little box around it. Demand curve D and demand curve D sub 1. Okay, demand curve D here, though I'm not sure why I put a box around it. Demand curve D, you can see, is much more rigorously sloped. It has a higher slope value, and it's negatively sloped, obviously, and it is relatively inelastic. And you can see that because both of them, whether it's D or D sub 1, start off here at P sub E and Q sub E where they cross. But you can see if I raise the price to P sub 1, the quantity barely changes. It does change because it's not completely vertical, but it doesn't change that much. There isn't a very large response to the change in price, where if we lower the price here to P sub 2, there isn't, you go all the way here, there's not a huge change in demand. Again, there's some change in quantity demanded because it's not vertical, but you can see the change in quantity demanded is not very large relative to the change in price. That's what makes it inelastic. The percent change in price would be greater than percent change in quantity demanded. And you can see here with the demand curve, D sub 1, which is a little bit more horizontal in this case. And remember, it's not always going to be linear, but I'm doing this to make it more understandable. You can see here we raise the price a little bit. With D, the inelastic, it barely moved. But here with D sub 1, we raise the price, and the quantity demanded is pretty large. The change in quantity demanded, goes from here all the way here. Where with the inelastic demand curve, it barely changed. So if we lower the price, you can see it barely changed on the inelastic curve, but you can see when P sub 2, when it's lowered with the elastic curve, with the demand sub 1, you see that the quantity change is quite significant. This is what makes it more inelastic, what makes it more elastic, right? That the percent change in quantity demanded is larger than the percent change in price. Now let's get back to the reasons why that happens. So that's our little review of what elasticity looks like. Okay, so the first one would be necessity. Okay, some goods are more necessary than others to the lives of people. And the more necessary those goods are, the more likely they're going to continue to buy them even as the price goes up. And if you're addicted to something, for me, I love milk. The price of milk keeps going up. I'm going to continue to buy milk. So my demand would be more inelastic, right? The price goes up, and I might buy a little bit less because the price is up, but I'm going to keep buying milk. Now, if it's perfectly inelastic, right? If it's perfectly inelastic, it would be completely vertical, and that might be the case for people who are very addicted, or it's very necessary. Maybe if you're a smoking addict, or you are, a drug addict, or if you have giant health problems that need medicine, and that medicine goes up in price, and you have to have it, then you're going to continue to keep buying it. You have an inelastic demand curve. Maybe if you're a young parent, or and the price of formula, the price of milk or something goes up, you're going to continue to buy that because you have to have food for your child. And the opposite is true for things that aren't necessary, right? If it's unnecessary or less necessary, it tends to be more elastic. The price goes down, all right, we'll buy some now, right? We didn't need it, but now the price is lower, we'll do that. If the price goes up, never mind, right? So there are lots of things that in our world they're not that necessary, or you're not that into, and if the price goes up, you can just do without it, and people will buy way less. And there are things that if the price goes down, all right, we'll do that now, right? We'll check it out. So people will buy a lot more. It's very price sensitive. So that would be one, the necessity of the good. Another one would be the number of substitutes, okay? Goods that have lots of substitutes, the more substitutes you have, the more elastic the curve, right? And there are some things that are perfectly elastic, which would be completely horizontal, right? Like the price of beef. one farmer doesn't have control of the entire market of beef. So if that person raises the price, people will just not buy any of it, right? They can go get somebody else's beef. If let's say it's a cereal box, right? And there's a million different types of cereals. So if one cereal gets way more expensive, there's so many substitutes, you'll just buy a different one. And because of that, that's put pressure to keep prices low. Otherwise, if the price rises somewhere, you'll just buy way less of that, and you'll buy way more of something else. So if there are very few substitutes, then it's the opposite. If there are very few substitutes, then it becomes more inelastic, right? If you are I'll use sports as an example. There are very few people who can stand in the pocket and play quarterback in the NFL while 6 guys are trying to tear his head off, look down the field, check off 3 receivers, and throw the ball 30 yards down the field and hit a spot while it's moving right before you get clobbered. You can count the number of people who are amazing at that on your hands. And so those people, there are very few substitutes. And because of that, they demand a lot of money, right? So if they start asking for a lot of money, you're just going to pay it, right? That's why people like LeBron James and Steph Curry make so much money. It's why people like Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers make so much money. They do something that there are very few substitutes for. And so those people can demand more. The price of them are higher. Same thing in if you have to have one good, if there are very few substitutes for it. I know when I used to play sports in high school and college, I had a brand that I had to have. I had a tennis shoe that I had to have. I had tennis socks I had to have. I had rackets I had to have. I had no substitutes for me. And because of that, the price went up. I was going to keep buying them, right? So that's something that is a driving force behind inelasticity is if there are very few substitutes. And that can be for an individual, but traditionally it's for a market. And then lastly, it's percent of income, all right? If what you're buying goes up in price, and that price is a very large percent of your income, you're just not going to buy it, right? It becomes very elastic. So if a car goes up $10,000 in price and you make $50,000 a year, that's a huge part of your income. You are going to be buying way less because it's an elastic demand, right? It's too big a part of your income. If a stick of gum goes up by 5 cents and it was 5 cents, that's a 100% increase in price, but it's only 10 cents now, so that's not a big part of your income. So if the price goes up, you'll keep buying it. That means it's an inelastic, right? If it's a small percent of your income, then you keep buying it, it's an elastic. But if it's a huge percent of your income, then that will change the way that you demand goods and services, okay? So those are the 3 basic reasons why, or determinants of why things are more or less elastic, whether they're more elastic or more inelastic.